You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matern, your host, and I've got Elise Joshi on the program. Elise is the executive director of Gen Z for Change. Elise just was very prominently featured on the news because she was in the White House and interrupted a press conference there advocating for stopping the oil leases from being sold to various oil companies and expanding drilling in Alaska as well as other places across the U.S. and taking a stand for change. And that video kind of went viral and has been viewed by millions or tens of millions of people across the world. And I thought it was an amazingly bold statement and took a lot of courage to stand up there and speak your mind in front of powerful people. I thought it was very well done, and kudos to you, Elise, for jumping up and having the courage to say what millions of others would like to say. So welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me and the kind words.
So tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to the place you are in the environmental movement. Tell us maybe what your, experience were going back to as a kid in nature. What were some of those experiences that you had in nature that were, formed you as a person and felt like, hey, I want to protect this?
Wow. So yeah, I grew up in the Bay Area. I'm from the South Bay, and I've never left. I went to college at Berkeley, and now that I've graduated, I'm still living out here. So it appears that I'll never leave. And the Bay Area is just beautiful. I feel very lucky to have grown up in a place that has access to nature, and I can go out in the trails in a couple of miles. And, now I feel like I'm taking advantage of it more than I did when I was a kid, actually. I don't own a car, and I bike and BART everywhere I go. And luckily I'm a couple miles away from the trails if I want to go on a trail run. But honestly, growing up, I had a strong belief that I didn't have much impact. And even though I cared about the climate crisis and I read up about it, I leaned towards STEM because I didn't believe that political advocacy was actually a tool that I could leverage, especially since a lot of people don't look like me in politics, especially when I was a lot younger and we didn't have people like AOC. And yeah, it really took until the COVID crisis in 2020 before I developed a belief that my voice mattered too.
So then, what did you start to do when you felt, hey, this may be something that you would like to advocate for in a political way?
Yeah, so during COVID, I really took the opportunity to read a lot, and I think it was 3 to 5 books a week during the height of the COVID pandemic, and I realized, in educating myself on the stats and projections of the climate crisis, in educating myself on the Trump presidency and what he was doing to roll back so many environmental protections, it wasn't enough. And I couldn't safely talk to my peers in person because of the state of the world. And so I turned to where a lot of Gen Zers were using as well, and that was TikTok. I realized that this was a place that a lot of people are on in this moment, and I could talk to other young people about the climate crisis, the tie to voting, since the 2020 election was coming up. And I started posting these documents that I made, these color-coded documents on the stats and projections of the climate crisis and the Trump presidency and all he's done to not keep his promises, to fail the American public. And I posted them online, and they did really well. And I just started using TikTok more and more as I went into college, realizing that this was a tool that I could use to make a difference.
Well, that's great. I mean, just kind of trying to find some way to communicate. I ran for president against Trump in the Republican primaries in 2020 because I was disgusted by his stance on environmental issues and felt that we need to make a change as a country, and that he was a failure as a leader, in particular on the environmental issues, but on so many other issues. But the environmental issues being so important that we don't get a second chance. We've got one planet, and if we ruin it, there's no planet B. So tell us then kind of next steps of your journey and where you went from there.
Absolutely. So luckily, I met these amazing other creators on TikTok as well, who were using their platforms to intersect voting with a number of other issues that they were personally passionate about, whether it was also climate or racial justice, LGBTQ plus protections, reproductive rights. And these other Gen Z creators ended up forming what was called TikTok for Biden. It was a coalition of over 500 content creators with a collective following of over 500 million people, using their platforms to talk about the importance of voting as it related to a number of different issues. And so this was really my start of organizing and connecting and collaborating with other like-minded young people. And from there, after the election, it formed into Gen Z for Change. And, a year after that, I became executive director. And so now I lead this group that does much more than electoral politics, takes action online, supports labor unions and climate efforts and more on the ground, and also holds the Biden administration accountable, despite being called TikTok for Biden once before. And that's my day-to-day job. I can't believe it's my job now.
Well, that's fantastic. I really like that you're kind of living your dreams out loud. And so tell us a little bit more about Gen Z for Change. How many people work at the organization? Kind of what makes it tick?
Yeah, so Gen Z for Change is still a baby organization. I mean, we started just 2 years ago as an official 501c4, and we have about 12 to 14 people on our full-time staff. We're like hiring now, so I don't have exact numbers. And it's a dedicated group at its core that are passionate about a number of different issues, but we have a large creator network of hundreds of creators that want to make content making a difference. Even if they don't have a political page, they might be passionate about sustainability, or they may be passionate about labor, and they want to engage in our campaigns. But at the core of what Gen Z for Change is it's a group of organizers that use digital tools, digital strategies, coalitions of creators to make effective change on the ground. And what's ultimately the goal is the impact, not the views that the videos get. It's about tangibly seeing how are the views making a difference in the real world towards the movements that we support.
So how do you measure that? How do you measure the impact? What are your tools? What are your metrics for determining whether you're moving the needle?
Yeah, that's the most important part. So Gen Z for Change has amazing coders on our team that are able to develop tools that young people can use through watching our videos online. So for example, when it comes to supporting unionization efforts with striking workers. So 48,000 workers at Kroger's in Southern California were going on strike for better wages and benefits and more. And they were hiring temporary hires in order to water down the strike, the Kroger's was. And what one of our amazing coders did was develop a code that allows people to send an automatic false application to these temporary applications in Kroger's, and allowed people to flood those application portals very easily and take them down. And so ultimately 40,000 plus false applications were sent through our social media advocacy, and all temporary applications were taken down. And so it's one example of just, we can track those metrics, we can track the impact, and striking workers are benefiting as a result.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, I think I'm a labor and employment attorney, and we represent lots of employees across the state of California, and we're always advocating for change in workers' rights and getting paid properly and fighting against discrimination. And sometimes we're doing it one worker at a time, and sometimes we're doing it for a whole class of thousands or even tens of thousands. So that's how we measure our impact, though I like what you guys are doing on the ground of fighting for it in different ways. So tell us, how are you doing that for the climate? What are the things that you do to measure your impact on the climate crisis?
Yeah, so one example of our work that was in coalition with hundreds of other climate creators and just regular people wanting to make a difference was with the Stop Willow movement that we saw earlier this year. In March 2023, the Biden administration approved the Willow Project, an $8 billion oil drilling project in the North Slope of Alaska. But back in February, I made the first video on TikTok urging people to write to the administration in the month that we had, urging them not to approve the project. And from that first video, I had no idea that it would go completely viral, and it became a campaign that no one could have anticipated. And ultimately, 1.1 million people wrote to the administration urging them not to approve the Willow Project. And over 5 million petition signatures were signed. And if you add up the 3 TikTok hashtags, it got 1.1 billion views. And so ultimately, like this took over the internet. And even though the Biden administration's approved the project, a lot of young people were educated on what the project was, why new oil drilling projects and new fossil fuel infrastructure is not important or necessary in this moment and actually damages our future. And we can use that momentum from Willow to continue the Stop Willow fight, but also continue to fight against new fossil fuel infrastructure. So that's one example of a campaign that we've done.
Well, you're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matern, your host, and I've got Elise Joshi on the program. She's the executive director for Gen Z for Change. We'll be right back in just 1 minute with Elise to talk about her encounters with a couple presidents of the United States. You're listening to A Climate Change, and this is Matern, your host, and I'm back with Elise Joshi, Executive Director of Gen Z for Change. Elise, before the break, we were talking about the Stop Willow campaign, where you got 1.1 million people to write into the White House, as well as 5 million signatures and 1.1 billion views on YouTube regarding this. And, I think that's a win for activating people to start taking action. And whether or not it stopped this particular project at this point, I think it may stop it later. So I'm kind of the opinion that we don't give up and you take the first step, and that war is not over in terms of stopping Willow. Like, there's a lot of steps, whether it's litigation or changing the law in a more favorable way going forward. So the fact that the fossil fuel industry got that one win is not going to necessarily mean that they win at the end of the day. So I appreciate you activating all those people to come out against it and essentially hold President Biden accountable for the promises that he made, in that he was against this drilling. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, it was 1.1 billion views on TikTok if you add the three hashtags. But I totally agree with you. I think the fossil fuel industry and the administration are starting to really take notice of Gen Z's involvement. The fact that, millions of people in a time where there's just so many issues happening all around the world. We have news at our fingertips, and yet all of us were so committed and involved in a campaign about an oil drilling project in a remote area of Alaska. Like that's pretty impressive. And I didn't expect that myself, nor did any of the creators that were a part of this campaign. So it was really inspiring. And I try to remind myself that it's not just about the battle, it's about the war. And, I think we just geared up a lot of young people to be ready to continue fighting.
So what's the next thing on your horizon in terms of projects that you're trying to work on in the environmental movement, either to
Well,
stop something or to start something or make an impact?
hopefully a bit of both. I think that we do too much. Right now, there's a lot of conversation on stopping things. It's about stopping fossil fuel projects, stopping Willow, et cetera. And I also want to be sure that we educate people on what the just transition looks like. So right now, I'm trying to help UAW. Their contract with GM, Ford, and Stellantis is coming up on September 14th. And UAW workers are demanding a just transition into the EV economy. And so this is a first example of what a just transition can look like in the real world in actuality. And it is up to the climate movement to stand in solidarity with these workers and to support their effort to have good union jobs in the EV economy, and not to just have those facilities shut down and, move to states that are right to work states that make it harder to unionize. So that's really one of my first projects, but I definitely am strategizing other fossil fuel related campaigns that I can help out with as well.
Well, that is such a big thing, is that there have been many arguments against the kind of sustainable transition away from fossil fuels, saying, oh, okay, that's going to shake up the economy too much, and there won't be jobs, and the economy will go in a tailspin, and we can't do this. And clearly that hasn't been the case thus far. There's been a tremendous amount of movement towards a more renewable fuel source, and yet we have the lowest unemployment rate in a generation, or in 50 years or something. So obviously we can do both at the same time. It's just a matter of putting that as a priority, which I'm glad that you're doing work to make sure that workers are taken care of in this transition. So where are you going next in terms of, are you going to be supporting Biden in 2024?
Well, I think it's safe to say that my vote is open, and and that young people deserve to have their vote earned, as any person deserves to have their vote earned. This generation is largely disappointed in what Biden is doing on climate. Of course, we're supportive of $369 billion for climate. That is no joke. But at the same time, Joe Biden has indicated that this is a first step. And so I'm really excited to see what step 2 is and step 3, because in 4 years, I anticipate to have more than one step done before the next election. And so, yeah, of course, I don't want to see, Republicans take over the presidency and the House, just because of, we know what Republicans do for the environment already. But at the same time, if we only have 2 options, it's important that our best option is the best option possible, and the one that really is a champion for climate. So it's not about being the better of 2 evils. It's about having a candidate that aligns with science. And right now, our president is not aligning with science in his continuous approval of fossil fuels.
Well, I guess I'd ask you, in terms of the Trump risk, is it worth getting one fossil fuel, say the Willow project, approved if it meant that Trump was not elected? Is there some compromise on principles? Obviously, sometimes in politics, one has to compromise a bit. And those of us who are environmentalists would probably prefer not to compromise on something like that. But maybe there's sometimes where compromise is necessary to avoid a disaster situation like Trump.
Well, I would like to remind everyone that it wasn't environmentalists that advocated to stop the Willow project. 5 million people petitioned for him not to do it. 1 million people wrote to the White House. It spanned beyond environmentalists, and the movement became young people and an intergenerational coalition of people that just care about a sustainable future, that care about a future for their children, for themselves at this point. We're all experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis, and it doesn't matter if you are a tree-hugging hippie or not. And even though I would identify myself as such, not everyone involved with that campaign was. They just cared a lot about their future. And the administration really should think to themselves, if youth support for Biden's climate and environmental policy dropped 13% after the Willow Project's approval, he's ought to think about next year's campaign the same way that we do. If he does not want the Trump administration to take over once again, he's ought to do more for climate and align with science. I don't think that's too hard of an ask. It's a very popular ask among people across the aisle and not just environmentalists.
Well, if you and your peers succeed, what will be the visible positive results in your lifetime? And if you fail, what would happen to our planet?
Well, I am a serial optimist, so I don't want to fail, and I don't think there's one win or one failing moment. This is a grind till I die, and I'm very aware of that. I would see a win as building a future that works for everyone. And right now our country just doesn't work for everyone. And, right now it's about creating a circular economy that doesn't revolve around waste and overconsumption and overproduction. It's about creating an economy that relies and values the everyday worker and values them in the decision-making process in their workplace. So good paying, good benefits, union jobs being, a core part of the American economy again, as it once was. This is about, universal single-payer healthcare so that, American families are not constantly going into debt because they can't pay their medical bills. This is about, climate resiliency and making sure that people who experience climate disaster, like so many families are in Maui, that they have the funds to rebuild and have sovereignty over the land that, was once colonized and is colonized. It's an intersectional movement that revolves around health justice, gender justice, racial justice, economic justice. And I know that seems like a very ambitious, hard accomplishment, but it's really the only way that we get out of this crisis. And it's the only way that the solutions to getting out of this crisis will be popular to everyone because it benefits everyone.
Well, I certainly can get on board with a lot of what you're saying. Certainly a more circular economy would be a great move in a positive direction with less waste, less plastic waste, less, waste that results in carbon in our atmosphere and methane in our atmosphere. So what does a failure look like if we're not able to accomplish these goals?
I believe that we're going to get to net zero. And I believe that it's intentional that we're saying net zero right now instead of ending fossil fuel dependency, because in the fossil fuel industry's eyes, net zero means technologically maneuvering our way to less carbon emissions. They imagine, direct air capture and, other geoengineering type solutions in order to reduce emissions and allow them to continue as business as usual. So we have the opportunity to not just eliminate carbon emissions, but have everything operate the same way, but instead create a world that works for us and not the fossil fuel industry that profits $100+ billion every year. And
amen to that. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, your host, and I am talking to Elise Joshi, who's the executive director for Gen Z for Change. I'll be right back with Elise to ask her some follow-up questions to these many interesting areas that we're talking about here. So stay tuned. We can change the world if we do it together. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, and I've got Elise Joshi on the program today. Elise, kind of want to circle back to something that you had mentioned earlier, which was the indigenous groups And certainly that there have been a lot of people talking about how we could certainly benefit from following a lot of their practices as a society, because those groups did not create as much waste and they live more sustainably. And how could we turn our society, which is so consumeristic, and into something that looks a little bit more like the indigenous values of looking far out in the future, like a seventh generations out? How are our actions going to look? What are your thoughts on that front? And doing it in a way that's kind of practical, because I think many people out there would think, well, that's just not practical. We can't go back to living in tents and things like that.
Well, I think it starts off by reframing our mindset on how we see ourselves as humans in the context of our ecosystem. That it's a common indigenous, philosophy that we bear the burdens of our ancestors, and the problems that we created hundreds of years ago we feel in our bodies today, and the problems that we create today our future generations will feel, and that's all a part of us, throughout time, throughout space. And that allows us to, not feel like we have ownership over the land, but rather that we depend on the land, and that we must take care of it if we want our own survival to happen. And then, in addition to our own philosophy and mindset that we need to decolonize, we need to understand what to advocate for. Right now, as we're speaking, thousands of families and people in Maui are traumatized over the worst wildfire that we've seen in the United States. Over 100 people have died, and that is climbing by the hour. 1,000 plus people are still missing. And, this is a direct result of hundreds of years of colonization, of, extracting the water instead of using it, for Lahaina used to be a wetland. That water is being used for tourists, for a tourism economy that has not benefited the average Native Hawaiian. 50% of the homeless population in Hawaii is Native, even though they're a minority of the islands at this point. And so when we think about solutions to the climate crisis, we have to think about ownership of land, like who has control over the rebuilding efforts of Maui and Lahaina. And that ownership effort must go to natives from Maui in their rebuilding efforts. And so when we think about our solutions to the climate crisis, who to include in the solutions and the stewardship of our lands, we must include Indigenous perspective and Indigenous knowledge. And so, yeah, it's both perspective and a solutions shift.
Well, I guess in terms of just from my lawyer background, I can't help myself. Say there are people that have the deeds to properties that got burned down, and they've owned those properties anywhere from 2 days to 200, 20 years. What happens to those properties? Do they go to indigenous groups, or do they maintain ownership of it? What's your view of that?
Well, right now we have a situation where there are private developers that are trying to buy off land from Native Hawaiians immediately after the fires. So what we're dealing with right now is making sure that Native land stays Native. So that's the first effort, because, what we're seeing is an immediate land grab effort. And as for the solutions in the long-term future of how to, reclaim ownership of private land, I leave that up to, the city council, that there's going to be a huge vote next year for the area of Lahaina of who they vote for, in order to shift the decision-making process over to people who are actually from the island. And, I hope they come up with an effort that makes sense for everyone.
So what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want your legacy to be?
I don't really want a legacy. I just want to for myself, be part of the solution. I don't have any personal career goals from this. I just want a sustainable future. And to be honest, like I know that you said I was living my dream by doing this work, and I definitely feel like it's fulfilling. But my dream is to not have to fight tooth and nail for a future. My dream is to have a bookshop where I can read, and maybe there's a restaurant on the second level, and I can relax and have a family, and work. But I'm doing this. And I've been doing this since I was a teenager, and I don't think I should have to do that. And I've met people a lot younger than me fighting this fight that I definitely think don't have to be doing this, but they feel like they have to. So yeah, my goal is to live a normal life, and I hope that someday we fight hard enough where that's possible.
Well, absolutely. And obviously, we all have played a part in it to a certain extent, or our ancestors played a part in setting up this situation, probably more unconsciously than consciously. But I guess that's part of the problem, is that it is unconscious. Tell us a little bit about your heroes. Who are your heroes in the environmental movement, or just in general? Who would be up on your Mount Rushmore of Elise's heroes?
Yeah, when I was younger, like I said, I really didn't think that I had a voice, and that people who looked like me, it was even possible to be in politics. And so I feel like I've got to say Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. When I was a teenager, I saw Knock Down the House. I saw her passion for a Green New Deal, and I realized, oh my God, like, she's a young Latina that is fighting for climate justice. I guess I can do this too. She's brave enough. It's time for me to be brave enough. And I really don't think I would be here without someone like her. And I appreciate her efforts in inspiring young people like me. And then I also am just really inspired by Latin American politics. I see Lula's efforts, when he was president before, but also now for ending deforestation in the Amazon. And just collectively, I think that, I'm inspired by my Ecuadorian family, and just the perspective of a lot of people from Latin America to be very involved in the political world, because they see how tied it is to their everyday life. And I try to have that mindset with me, even though the United States is very individualized and not a lot of people vote and aren't as engaged in their local, state, federal politics. And yeah, I have, my grandfather was really very politically involved when he was in college. And when I was in Ecuador just a month ago, he was telling me a whole bunch of stories of how he organized when he was in college, and I'm inspired by that too.
So that's 3. You've got one more.
Let's see. I think I got to give it to the old white man, Bernie Sanders. I know he doesn't he doesn't exactly represent me in terms of identity politics, but he inspired a generation to get up and not just fight for what we can get by with, but fight for what we deserve. And that is not common in American politics either. And I would have to give huge kudos to him.
Well, it's it's always enlightening to me to hear people's heroes, because everybody chooses different people, and different people have a different impact. And so I appreciate you sharing that with us, because it's a great thing to hear about, because inspiration is such a big part of political change. So I think inspiration is what's required to move people. And obviously you've inspired a lot of people, to young people, to get active. What do you think it's going to take to get more young people inspired, and maybe people who are not so young to get off their seats and get into action?
That's the burning question. I really hope, and I've tried to emphasize since that viral video, that you can't borrow hope. And, hope can be a renewable resource that you pull from to drive you to continue to act, but you can't get that through somebody else. You have to get that through your own activism, through your own involvement in your community. It's about young people and all generations feeling how the climate crisis has impacted them in their home. So, it isn't just about the Biden presidency. This is about how is housing related to the climate crisis? How is immigration related to the climate crisis? What is your community dealing with unrelated to climate, or related, and tie it back to climate, and see how you can tie those solutions together and see an immediate impact in your community. It's about getting young people to act locally so that they can see the own benefits of their actions. And I hope that my video didn't just inspire them, but actually get them to start thinking about how they can get involved.
Well, I appreciate that message, and I believe that sometimes it takes another person asking someone to get involved to get them involved, because I think a lot of times people are yearning to help, but they don't know where or how. And so all of us who are involved in this would be well served to go out there and ask somebody, hey, why don't you get involved? Come help, come join me. So with that, everybody go out there and ask somebody, and we'll be right back in just 1 minute talking to Elise Joshi, who is the Executive Director of Gen Z for Change. Stay tuned. We can change the world if we do it together. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is your host, Matern, and I've got Elise Joshi on the program. And Elise, we were talking before the break about acting locally, and I know one of your passions is urban planning. I believe that that's something that certainly can drive change. You see a lot of European cities, thousands of people riding their bikes to work, or all over the city. Whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall, they're out there on their bikes, and it's pretty amazing, saving probably bazillion tons of fossil fuels. And you're a big proponent of not driving and using mass transit. What can we do to kind of drive change there?
Absolutely. So I'm lucky to live in the Bay Area, where I can use the train and bike everywhere I go, but it made me realize what is possible even in a country where we have put all of our transit funding into roads. And we think about, oh my goodness, how many billions of dollars do we put into road work, and thinking about how much less damage just biking does to the roads. But we would need to repair less and spend less on our infrastructure if we just biked around. But more fun than that, biking is a way to communicate with your surroundings better than a car. So does walking. How can we incentivize people to spend less time in a car and actually experience the outside world and engage with their community? Half of driving trips are less than 3 miles. And if we reduce those, we can make a huge effort in our transportation emissions, but also make people's everyday lives and well-being better. When my partner sent me a photo when he was in Amsterdam of a man in a prosthetic leg biking with his buddies in Amsterdam. And that really just shows the culture that's out there, is that anybody can be on a bike. And if we just build our infrastructure out to supporting public transit, buses, walkable infrastructure, that we'd be in a lot better place.
Absolutely. And it's, as you said, you get more pleasure in life when you do bike. So it's a win-win situation. One of the things that I noticed, I took a train ride from Chicago to Denver recently, was just the sorry state of our train system here in the United States, and that we probably have invested less than most third world countries in our train system. And it seems like if we had spent a quarter of the amount of money that we spent building roads as to building a amazing train system, we'd have a train system that would be the envy of the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is an opportunity to match up with the rest of the world at this point. I mean, you go to New York, and I went through the tunnels, and it felt like a magical labyrinth of, oh my God, I don't even have to wait for the train. It comes every 3 to 4 minutes. And, I can choose which train I want to go to the same place. And as somebody that used BART, if you miss your BART, you need to wait 20 minutes until your next one, and you're going to be late to wherever you're going. So you really got to be on time. We are used to less than the bare minimum in this country, and I'm lucky. There should be a rail system to get from San Francisco to LA. Why isn't there? And why, we should make it, fast, 200 miles an hour, or we've got rails that are slow, unreliable, or non-existent, and we can do a lot better than that.
Yeah, that was one of the things I learned on my ride. One of the Amtrak employees was talking with me, and I said, the ride's kind of rough. And he said, well, it's all freight train tracks because the Amtrak doesn't own any of the tracks kind of east of the far, the East Coast and the urban belts right along the coast on the Atlantic side. So it's pretty incredible that I assume the fossil fuel industry was certainly behind defunding our railway system because it obviously benefited them. I wanted to ask you, you said you wanted to have a family. Based upon what you know, do you really want to bring children into this world, or is it you afraid of that at all?
Yes, and a lot of young people are afraid of, is it ethical to have a child in today's world? But I believe that it's also a sense of hope. I'm committed to winning a Green New Deal. I'm committed to winning a just future for everybody. And, I feel like it's me giving up by me not advocating for the future that I want and deserve. And, I'm not really willing to commit to this doomist mindset that we have failed so much that there should not be another generation that follows. And you know what? There will inevitably be another generation that follows. And by me being committed to a future that I really want, I'm that much more passionate to build it.
That's a great point. And I think that one of the things that I had read about you was that you didn't ascribe to this doomsday philosophy, and that you wanted to focus on solutions, which I believe is the best method to approach this. We need to live in the solution. If we're living in the solution, there are just thousands of great people, actually millions of great people out there working on these solutions and trying to make the world a better place. And it can happen. We just need to keep working together, building this community, supporting companies and governmental officials that are working for these changes, and voting for people that support these changes, and the change will occur.
Absolutely.
So what's the next thing on your docket? Where are you going? Who are you meeting with? Where are you going to rock the world next, Elise?
I don't know. I hope that I'm excited what other people are about to do. I'm not there, but New York Climate Week is going to be a month away, and there's going to be mass protests as the UN has their climate summit of just regular people that really want Biden to declare a climate emergency and take action on fossil fuels. So excited to see what other young people come up with on the other side of the country. But as for me, I have a few ideas cooking that I'm not able to share quite yet. But in the meantime, really just trying to support the labor campaigns that are happening right now, like UAW, and also take some time to rest, because a message to everyone out there, rest is super important. And we're trying to be here for 50, 60 years more in our fight towards climate justice, and that can't happen if we burn ourselves out in the next 3. So I'm trying to spend time with loved ones and bike around the Bay Area and have some time for myself.
That's a good message. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So
yep.
You better. A friend of mine once said that to me a few years ago, and I think I've tried to adapt my life a little bit more to that philosophy, because I think it is a sustainable one. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on COP28, which is coming up in Dubai, hosted by one of the biggest oil and natural gas producing countries in the world. Is that going to be, a crazy situation, or can we get some actual progress out of that?
I think it's going to be both. COP28 sounds like a big contradiction right now, but I anticipate the most fossil fuel lobbyists that we've ever seen at a COP in the past, but also a relentless, passionate coalition of young people, indigenous groups, global South activists, and more, like pushing as hard as they possibly can. And I can't wait to see what comes out of it, and I hope to be covering it on TikTok, just because a lot of young people don't even know that COP28 is happening or what COP28 is, and maybe there's some educational work that I can do around that.
Yeah, education is clearly one of the most important things we can do to raise awareness, and there's so much to read and to learn about the climate crisis. And I appreciate what you were saying about how you were reading 3 to 5 books a week, and that really helps allow you to talk about these issues intelligently and passionately and persuasively, which is a very important piece of this process. Like, not everybody else is going to go out there and read as much as you've read, probably. That's just the reality. So thank you for all your great reading. I wanted to just tell the audience to go check out what you're doing as the executive director for Gen Z for Change. So please do follow Gen Z for Change and Elise, Joshi, and all the great work that they're doing. And then follow us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at climatechange.com. Please check out our website, give us feedback, tell us about guests you'd like to hear. And so in the coming week, go out there and be the change you want to see in the world. Improve the environment. Talk to elected officials. Volunteer. Those are the kinds of things that you've seen Elise do so effectively. Stand up in the press room, confronting the Biden administration to do more. And that's what we all need to be doing. Step up and take the change into our own hands. So thank you, Elise, again for being on the program. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
We can change the world.